Jerusalem, Israel, October 2023. The ancient stones beneath the old city held secrets for 2,000 years, but none more dangerous than what was about to surface. Dr. Yael Cohen, chief archaeologist from Hebrew University, stood in a narrow cave system, her hands trembling as she watched a 5-year-old American girl named Louis Morrison point to a specific section of limestone wall. "Right there," the child said with impossible certainty. "Behind that stone, 3 layers deep. That is where I hid the truth before they could destroy it." The Vatican observers, Father Giuseppe Romano and Cardinal Mark Bellamy, exchanged nervous glances. This was supposed to be a debunking expedition, a simple task of exposing another false claim. But when the ground-penetrating radar confirmed a hollow space exactly where the child indicated, the Cardinal's face turned ashen. Louis stepped closer to the wall, her small fingers tracing patterns on the ancient rock. "They called me a whore to silence me," she whispered in flawless Aramaic, a language she had never studied. "They erased my words because I taught what he taught, because I was his beloved, because I was supposed to lead them." Dr. Cohen felt tears streaming down her face as her team carefully removed the stones. Inside, sealed in a clay vessel that had not been touched in millennia, were scrolls. Aramaic scrolls written in a feminine hand. The first words visible made Father Romano stumble backward. "I am Miriam of Magdala, and this is my testimony. What you are about to discover is the most shocking documented case of past life memory ever recorded. A story that brought the Vatican to its knees and forced the rewriting of 2,000 years of history. A story that proves some truths refuse to stay buried, no matter how deep they are hidden. But to understand how a 5-year-old girl from Portland, Oregon, came to expose the greatest cover-up in Christian history, we must go back to where it all began. Before we continue, please consider subscribing to the channel and letting us know where you're watching from. We read every single comment and truly appreciate you taking the time to listen to the story. Portland, Oregon, 6 months earlier. The Morrison family lived in a craftsman-style home in the quiet Laurelhurst neighborhood, where maple trees lined the streets and children rode bikes until sunset. Dr. Michael Morrison, 38, was a tenured theology professor at Portland State University, specializing in the historical deconstruction of religious myths. His office walls were covered with degrees from Princeton and Oxford, and his published work had dismantled countless claims of miracles and supernatural phenomena. He was a man who built his career on rationality, on provable facts, on the cold, hard truth that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence. His wife, Sarah Morrison, 36, had a different story. Raised in a strict Catholic household in Boston, she had left the church at 19 after questioning too many doctrines and receiving too few satisfying answers. She worked as a freelance graphic designer from their home, creating logos and websites for local businesses. But in her desk drawer, hidden beneath old sketches and tax documents, she still kept the rosary beads her grandmother had given her the day before she died. Sarah could not explain why she kept them. Their daughter, Louis Morrison, had just turned 5 that spring. She was a bright, energetic child who loved finger painting at her preschool, watching Frozen on repeat, and collecting rocks from the backyard. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, described her as imaginative and kind, always the first to comfort a crying classmate. There was nothing extraordinary about Louis. She struggled with tying her shoes. She still sometimes mixed up her left and right. She believed in the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus with absolute conviction. The Morrison home was filled with the comfortable chaos of family life. Dinosaur toys scattered across the living room floor. The refrigerator covered with Louis's crayon drawings. The sound of NPR playing softly in the kitchen during breakfast. It was a normal American household built on logic, love, and the comforting predictability of routine. None of them knew that in 48 hours, everything they believed about reality was about to shatter. Saturday morning, May 14th, 2023. Sarah had planned a simple outing to the Portland Art Museum, a monthly tradition she shared with Louis while Michael graded papers at home. The spring weather was perfect, sunshine breaking through the typical Oregon clouds. They walked hand in hand through the European painting galleries, Louis skipping ahead occasionally to press her nose against the glass, protecting centuries-old masterpieces. She giggled at the chubby cherubs in Baroque paintings. She asked why everyone looked so serious in the portraits. Then they entered Gallery 7, a smaller room dedicated to Renaissance religious art. The moment Louis crossed the threshold, her entire body went rigid. Her small hand clenched Sarah's fingers with surprising strength. Louis's eyes locked onto a painting at the far wall, a 16th-century Italian depiction of Mary Magdalene in the desert, her red hair flowing, her hands clutched in prayer, her eyes raised to heaven in ecstatic devotion. "Louis, what is it?" Sarah asked, feeling her daughter's hand trembling. The child did not answer. She walked toward the painting as if pulled by invisible strings, her steps slow and deliberate. When she stood directly in front of it, she began to shake. Her breathing became rapid and shallow. Then her eyes rolled back, showing only whites, and she collapsed to the marble floor. The security guard rushed over. Another museum visitor, a nurse, knelt beside the seizing child. Sarah screamed for someone to call 911. The episode lasted 47 seconds, though it felt like hours. When Louis's eyes finally opened, they were different. The innocent sparkle was gone, replaced by something ancient and knowing. Her lips moved, forming words in a language Sarah had never heard. The syllables were guttural and flowing, rhythmic and strange. "They buried my testimony with me," Louis said in perfect Aramaic. "They feared what I knew." Then her eyes closed again, and she went limp in her mother's arms. The emergency room doctors at OHSU Hospital found nothing wrong. No tumors, no lesions, no neurological abnormalities. A perfectly healthy 5-year-old girl who had experienced what they classified as a non-epileptic seizure, possibly triggered by stress or dehydration. They recommended follow-up appointments and sent the family home with instructions to monitor for any recurring episodes. But Louis was not the same child who had entered that museum. That night, she sat at the dinner table, pushing her chicken nuggets around her plate, her usual enthusiasm for her favorite food completely absent. Michael tried to engage her in conversation about her day, carefully avoiding mention of the incident. Louis looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. "Daddy, why do you teach lies about Miriam?" Michael froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "What did you say, sweetheart?" "Miriam of Magdala. You teach that she was a bad woman, a woman who sold her body. But that is a lie. She was a teacher. She had wealth from her family's purple dye trade. She funded the entire ministry. Without her money, there would have been no ministry at all." Sarah and Michael exchanged horrified glances. Their daughter had never heard the name Miriam, the Hebrew form of Mary. She had certainly never learned about economic support structures in first-century Judean religious movements. Over the next 3 weeks, it got worse. Louis began correcting Michael's lecture notes when he brought them home. She pointed out errors in his published papers about the Gnostic Gospels. She drew detailed maps of Jerusalem's layout before the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, including streets and buildings that were only confirmed by recent archaeological surveys. She knew the names of the other disciples' wives, information that appeared nowhere in canonical texts. She described the texture of the bread they ate, the smell of olive oil lamps, the feeling of dust between her toes on cobblestone streets, and she insisted, with growing desperation, that Mary Magdalene was not a prostitute, but the beloved disciple, the one Jesus trusted most. Michael Morrison's rational mind was at war with the evidence accumulating before him. He spent sleepless nights researching childhood false memory syndrome, cryptomnesia, and cases of children accessing information through forgotten exposure to media. Perhaps Louis had seen a documentary he did not remember showing her. Perhaps she had overheard conversations at his university office when Sarah brought her to campus. Perhaps this was an elaborate confabulation triggered by the museum seizure. Filmed Louis speaking in the strange language and sent the video to Dr. Hassan al-Rashid, a linguist colleague at Reed College who specialized in ancient Semitic languages. The response came within hours, and Michael's hands shook as he read the email. This is authentic 1st century Galilean Aramaic, complete with regional dialectical markers specific to the Magdala area near the Sea of Galilee. The pronunciation, the grammatical structures, the vocabulary, all of it is consistent with linguistic patterns we have only reconstructed from fragmentary sources. Where did this child learn this? Michael had no answer. Sarah's response was entirely different. She began attending Mass again, slipping into the back pew of St. Mary's Cathedral while Louis was at preschool. She lit candles. She prayed for guidance. She pulled out her grandmother's rosary beads and held them at night when anxiety made sleep impossible. The marriage began to fracture under the weight of their differing reactions. "You are treating this like a research project," Sarah screamed one night after Louis had gone to bed. "Our daughter is terrified, Michael. She cries herself to sleep, saying she has to tell the truth before it is too late. And you are worried about your academic reputation." Michael's face hardened. "What do you want me to say, Sarah? That our daughter is the reincarnation of a biblical figure? That goes against everything we know about neuroscience, about psychology, about reality itself." "Then explain it." Sarah shot back. "Explain how she knows things that are not in any book. Explain the Aramaic. Explain the maps." Michael could not. The video went viral by accident. Sarah's sister, Emily, a social media manager in Los Angeles, shared the clip of Louis speaking Aramaic on her Instagram story with the caption, "My niece is speaking a 2,000-year-old language and no one can explain it." Within 72 hours, the video had been viewed 4.3 million times. News outlets from CNN to the BBC requested interviews. Skeptics called it a hoax, religious groups called it a miracle. And in Jerusalem, Dr. Yael Cohen, a 52-year-old Israeli archaeologist and expert in early Christian history, watched the video on her phone while eating breakfast. She watched it 7 times in a row. Dr. Cohen had spent 3 decades excavating sites across Israel, uncovering synagogues, mikvahs, and evidence of Jewish life in the Roman period. She had written extensively on the role of women in early Christianity, arguing against traditional interpretations that minimized their importance. She was also a skeptic of supernatural claims, having debunked dozens of supposed miracle sites and fraudulent relics. But something about this video unsettled her professional certainty. She called the Morrison family that evening. Michael answered, exhausted and defensive. "Dr. Morrison, my name is Yael Cohen. I am calling from Jerusalem about your daughter." Before Michael could respond with his prepared statement declining all media requests, Dr. Cohen continued, "I do not want an interview. I want to test what your daughter knows. If she is accessing genuine historical memory, she will be able to provide information that is not publicly available, details from my own unpublished excavation data. And if she cannot, we can rule out supernatural explanations and focus on psychological interventions." Michael agreed immediately, relieved to have a scientific approach. 3 days later, Dr. Cohen sat in the Morrison living room, her laptop open, her recorder running. Louis came downstairs in her pajamas, clutching a stuffed rabbit. The archaeologist smiled warmly, putting the child at ease. "Louis, can you tell me where Miriam of Magdala is buried?" The 5-year-old's eyes filled with tears. "In a cave beneath the city, near where the pools used to be." She walked down 39 steps. The tomb faces east. There is a symbol carved above the entrance, a circle with 7 lines. Dr. Cohen's face had gone pale during that first interview. The 7-lined symbol Louis described was a recently discovered mark associated with wealthy patrons in 1st century Judea, found in only 3 locations, none of which had been publicized outside academic journals. The 39 steps matched the typical depth of burial caves in Jerusalem's geology, and the eastern-facing entrance aligned with Jewish burial customs for people of significance. Within a week, Dr. Cohen had arranged funding through Hebrew University and secured permits from the Israeli Antiquities Authority. The Morrison family boarded a Delta flight to Tel Aviv on June 2, 2023. Michael brought his laptop and recording equipment, determined to document everything with scientific rigor. Sarah brought her rosary beads, which she hid in her carry-on bag. Louis brought her stuffed rabbit and asked repeatedly if they were going home. But they were not alone in their interest. The Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the modern successor to the Inquisition, had been monitoring the viral video. Cardinal Marc Bellamy, a 67-year-old French-Canadian known for his conservative theology and his skill at managing church scandals, dispatched Father Giuseppe Romano to observe the excavation. Father Romano, 43, was a Jesuit priest with a doctorate in church history and a reputation as a fixer, someone who could discredit controversial claims with academic precision. He arrived in Jerusalem 2 days before the Morrison family, establishing connections with the Israeli Ministry of Religious Affairs and making it clear that the Vatican had concerns about amateur archaeology making sensational claims about sacred figures. The tension was immediate. Dr. Cohen resented Vatican interference in a secular archaeological investigation. Father Romano resented what he viewed as exploitation of a mentally ill child. Michael resented everyone who treated his daughter as either a prophet or a patient rather than a person. And Sarah just wanted someone, anyone, to help her daughter stop crying at night. They all gathered for the first time in the lobby of the King David Hotel, the historic Jerusalem landmark where prime ministers and presidents had stayed. Louis walked in holding Sarah's hand, took one look at Father Romano's clerical collar, and spoke in Aramaic. "You are wearing the robes of those who silenced me. The old city of Jerusalem is a labyrinth of narrow streets, ancient stones, and competing claims to sacred ground." For 3 days, Dr. Cohen's team conducted ground-penetrating radar surveys in the areas Louis had indicated, searching for the cave system the child insisted existed. Father Romano accompanied them, his skepticism evident in his constant questions and note-taking. On the 4th day, Louis asked to lead them herself. She had been staying at the hotel with Sarah while the adults worked, but that morning she woke up screaming that they were running out of time. Michael wanted to refuse, to protect his daughter from more stress, but Louis was insistent with a desperation that frightened them all. They walked through the Armenian Quarter as morning light filtered through the ancient architecture. Louis moved with purpose, turning down streets without hesitation, navigating as if she had walked these paths 1,000 times. Modern buildings now covered much of the 1st century city, but Louis pointed to locations beneath the contemporary structures. "There used to be a fountain there," she said, indicating a parking lot. "That building sits on top of the house where I stayed when I came to Jerusalem. It belonged to a woman named Joanna. Her husband worked for Herod." Dr. Cohen checked her research. Joanna, wife of Chusa, Herod's steward, was indeed mentioned in Luke's Gospel as one of the women who supported Jesus' ministry financially. But this was not public knowledge, not something a 5-year-old from Portland would know. They reached a section of exposed bedrock near the Muslim quarter. Louis stopped abruptly, her small body beginning to tremble. She clutched Sarah's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I cannot go in there," she whispered. "They hurt people who went in there. They called us possessed. They said women could not teach, could not lead, could not speak the truth about what he taught us." Sarah knelt beside her daughter. "You are safe, sweetheart. No one will hurt you now." But Louis was crying, shaking with a terror that transcended this moment. I watched them change everything. I watched them erase us. I watched them make me into a whore instead of an apostle. Dr. Cohen's team spent 6 hours carefully excavating the entrance to the cave system. Modern concrete and debris from various construction projects over centuries had to be removed with painstaking care. Father Romano observed in silence, his earlier skepticism replaced by something that looked like fear. When they finally broke through to the ancient passage, the air that escaped was stale and undisturbed, carrying the scent of millennia. The cave descended exactly 39 steps, carved into the limestone bedrock with the precision of first-century Jewish burial practices. The walls showed traces of plaster, long deteriorated but still visible. At the bottom, the passage opened into a small chamber, roughly 15 feet square. The entrance faced east, just as Louis had described, and above the entrance, carved into the stone with remarkable preservation, was a circle with 7 radiating lines. Dr. Cohen stood in the center of the chamber, her flashlight revealing the empty space. "Standard Jewish burial cave," she said quietly. "First-century construction, but no ossuary, no bones, no artifacts." Louis, still standing at the top of the stairs with Sarah, called down. "The far wall, 3 stones from the left, 2 from the bottom. Behind it." Michael moved to the indicated location, his camera recording everything. The stones looked identical to all the others, fitted together so precisely that mortar had barely been necessary. But when Dr. Cohen's assistant used a small pry bar to test the stones, one of them shifted. The removal process took 45 minutes. Behind the stone was a hollow space, a deliberate hiding place carved into the rock. Inside was a clay vessel, sealed with wax and cloth, covered in dust but intact. Father Romano crossed himself, whispering prayers in Latin. Dr. Cohen's hands shook as she carefully lifted the vessel. Inside were scrolls, tightly rolled, made of leather parchment that had been preserved by the dry cave environment and the sealed container. The first scroll was carefully unrolled, just enough to reveal the opening lines. Dr. Cohen read the Aramaic text aloud, her voice breaking. "I am Miriam of Magdala, called Magdalene, and this is my testimony of what I witnessed, what I was taught, and what they tried to erase." Father Romano sat down heavily on the stone floor. The scrolls were transported to the Israel Museum's climate-controlled laboratory for analysis. Radiocarbon dating, paleographic analysis, and material testing would take months to complete definitively. But preliminary examinations confirmed what Dr. Cohen already knew in her bones. These were authentic first-century documents. The leather parchment was consistent with production methods from that period. The Aramaic script matched patterns from other Dead Sea-era texts, and the content was explosive. The first scroll was a personal account by a woman identifying herself as Miriam of Magdala, describing her role as a teacher and financial patron of the Jesus movement. She detailed conversations, theological debates, and her position as a leader among the earliest followers. The second scroll was even more controversial, a collection of correspondence between early church fathers in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, discussing how to minimize the role of women leaders. The letters explicitly referenced decisions to recast Mary Magdalene as a repentant prostitute, conflating her with other women in the Gospels to diminish her authority. The phrase, "It is better that men lead the churches," appeared multiple times. The discovery dominated international news within hours. The Vatican issued an immediate statement calling for careful scholarly review before any conclusions were drawn, but the defensive tone suggested they knew what was coming. Cardinal Bellamy returned to Rome for emergency consultations. Father Romano remained in Jerusalem, his crisis of faith visible to everyone around him. 3 days after the discovery, he sat with Sarah in a quiet corner of the hotel courtyard. He looked exhausted, years older than when he had arrived. "Mrs. Morrison," he said quietly, "the Church has protected certain narratives for so long that we convinced ourselves they were divine truth rather than human choices. The woman in those scrolls, the woman your daughter described, she is powerful and clear and unambiguous about her role. We have known fragments of this story for generations. The Gnostic Gospels hinted at it. Academic research suggested it. But we maintained the official position because," he paused, "because power is difficult to share, even sacred power." Sarah listened in silence. "Do you believe my daughter was Mary Magdalene?" Father Romano looked at her for a long moment. "I believe something extraordinary is happening that I cannot explain, and I believe the truth matters more than institutional comfort. The authentication process continued for weeks, but the conclusion became increasingly clear. The scrolls were genuine first-century documents that fundamentally challenged traditional church teachings about Mary Magdalene's role in early Christianity. Dr. Cohen's team published preliminary findings in the Journal of Biblical Archaeology. Christian denominations worldwide began internal discussions about how to incorporate these revelations into their theology. Conservative groups called it a hoax, despite the scientific evidence. Progressive congregations celebrated the validation of women's leadership. And in the middle of this global religious upheaval, Louis Morrison began to forget. It started small. She stopped correcting her father's work. She asked questions about things she had previously known with certainty. The Aramaic phrases that had flowed so easily from her lips became difficult to remember. By the time the family returned to Portland in early July, 2 weeks after the discovery, Louis could no longer recall the map of ancient Jerusalem she had drawn with such precision. The ancient knowledge that had possessed her for 2 months was fading like a dream upon waking. Michael documented the decline with the same scientific rigor he had applied to the escalation. Sarah watched her daughter return to normalcy with relief and grief intertwined, grateful to have her little girl back, but mourning the loss of whatever extraordinary connection had existed. On Louis's first day back at preschool, Mrs. Patterson asked if she had enjoyed her trip. Louis shrugged, picking up a crayon to color a picture of a rainbow. "We went to see some old rocks. It was boring. Do you want to see my new Elsa doll?" That evening, Sarah asked her daughter if she remembered anything about Mary Magdalene. Louis looked up from her chicken nuggets, genuinely confused. "Who? The woman from the museum painting?" Sarah prompted gently. "The woman you said you were." Louis's face scrunched up in concentration, trying to remember, but the memories were gone. "I do not think I said that, Mommy. Can I watch Frozen after dinner?" Michael and Sarah sat in the living room after Louis went to bed, the house quiet except for the familiar sounds of suburban Portland outside their windows. Their daughter was normal again, but they had videos, recordings, photographs, and the undeniable reality of scrolls in a Jerusalem laboratory that proved something impossible had happened. The scrolls of Miriam of Magdala are still being studied, translated, and debated. The initial findings have been published in academic journals, examined by scholars from multiple religious traditions, and confirmed as authentic first-century documents by every credible dating method available. Churches across the globe are wrestling with what these texts mean for 2,000 years of doctrine. Some denominations have begun ordaining women into leadership positions previously denied them. Others maintain their traditional interpretations, arguing that the scrolls do not change fundamental theology. The Vatican established a special commission to review the documents and their implications, a process that will likely take years to complete officially. But in quiet conversations among Catholic clergy, many acknowledge what Father Romano admitted in Jerusalem. The Church knew, not every detail, not the specific location of the scrolls, but the general truth that Mary Magdalene's role had been deliberately minimized to maintain male leadership structures. The human choices that shaped doctrine are being re-examined. Louis Morrison is 7 years old now. She plays soccer, takes piano lessons, and loves her second-grade teacher. She has no memory of speaking Aramaic, drawing maps of ancient Jerusalem, or leading archaeologists to one of the most significant biblical discoveries of the modern era. Her parents have decided not to remind her, not to burden her with the knowledge of what happened. The videos remain saved on an external hard drive, rarely watched. Sarah still keeps the rosary beads in her desk drawer. Michael published a book about the experience that forced him to reconsider his earlier positions on religious phenomena. And in Portland, in a quiet craftsman home, a normal American family lives with the knowledge that sometimes truth breaks through in ways that defy explanation. How many other truths have been buried by those who feared them? How many voices were silenced because they threatened established power? Press 1 in the comments if you believe Louis Morrison truly was Mary Magdalene reincarnated. Press 2 if you think there is another explanation. Subscribe for more stories that challenge everything we know about life, death, and the eternal journey of the soul. Some truths wait 2,000 years to surface.